We have decided to invite the Argentine Republic, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become full members of BRICS.
Ahead of naval exercises involving BRICS countries in South African waters, 2 Chinese naval ships as well as an Iranian vessel were seen arriving in Cape Town. These drills will start on Friday and run until the 16th of January. The exercise would involve navies from BRICS countries, including that of Russia. BRICS, originally made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, has expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia.
BRICS is the way forward. BRICS is the next stage. We want socialism. Look, BRICS is not a socialist organization, but the world today no longer has to bow to the USA, to the US dollar, and to the dictates of European countries. No longer. And as Africans, what we have to do is to organize our own economies.
What if one of America's longest economic partners in Africa just stopped playing by Washington's rules? Over the past year, South Africa has quietly made moves that are shaking the global system, moves that signal a deeper shift away from U.S. economic influence and toward a new power center built around BRICS. This isn't just about politics, it's about money, trade, currencies, and who gets to set the rules of the global economy. While Washington focused elsewhere, South Africa recalculated, and the balance of power may never be the same. Tonight, we break down how BRICS became the final turning point, and why the U.S. is suddenly paying very close attention. For decades, South Africa occupied a careful position in the global order. It was not fully aligned with the West, yet deeply integrated into Western-led systems of trade, finance, and diplomacy. The United States and Europe were among its largest trading partners. The U.S. dollar dominated its international transactions. Western financial institutions still played a major role in shaping capital flows, investments, and development priorities. But beneath the surface, tension had been building for years. South African leaders increasingly felt that the global system they had joined after apartheid no longer worked in their favor. The rules appeared fixed. Capital flowed outward more easily than it flowed in. Commodity wealth left the continent, often returning as finished products priced beyond local reach. Policy pressure from Western institutions felt one-sided: discipline without flexibility, expectations without concessions. This dissatisfaction didn't explode overnight. It accumulated slowly, through trade disputes, diplomatic disagreements, and shifting global realities. Then came BRICS. When South Africa joined BRICS alongside Brazil, Russia, India, and China, it was initially framed as symbolic, a prestige move rather than a strategic break. But over time, BRICS evolved from a loose diplomatic club into something far more consequential, a coordinated attempt to reduce reliance on Western economic infrastructure. What changed is not rhetoric, it's mechanics. South Africa began exploring trade settlements in non-dollar currencies. It deepened energy, mining, and infrastructure. Tis with China and India. It aligned diplomatically with BRICS positions in global forums, even when those positions conflicted with Washington's expectations. To U.S. policymakers, these actions looked like quiet defiance. To South African officials, they looked like overdue diversification. The breaking point wasn't one event, it was realization. South Africa recognized that the world had entered a multipolar phase. The assumption that Western markets would always dominate demand, financing, and influence no longer matched reality. Asia was rising. The global South was coordinating, and BRICS offered something the West never fully did: leverage through collective strength. This is where the balance began to shift. Washington had long relied on structural power control over financial systems, reserve currency dominance, sanctions enforcement, and access to capital markets. But BRICS began constructing alternatives, not replacements yet, but enough options to weaken dependency. South Africa didn't abandon the US, it recalibrated, and that recalibration sent a signal far beyond Pretoria. Other African nations watched closely. If South Africa, the continent's most industrialized economy, could expand trade outside the dollar, negotiate energy deals without Western intermediaries, and assert diplomatic independence without economic collapse, then others could too. This worried U.S. strategists, because influence doesn't disappear all at once, it erodes at the margins. Every transaction settled outside the dollar slightly weakens its dominance. Every development loan sourced outside Western institutions reduces policy leverage. Every coordinated BRICS position in global institutions dilutes Western voting power. From South Africa's perspective, this wasn't ideological rebellion, it was risk management. Why rely on one system when the world offers alternatives? Why remain exposed to sanctions pressure, interest rate shocks, and external political demands when diversification is possible? And why should Africa remain the last region still expected to play by rules written elsewhere? The tension sharpened as US-China competition intensified. Washington increasingly viewed neutrality as alignment. South Africa's refusal to choose sides was interpreted as resistance. Diplomatic language hardened, media narratives shifted. Suddenly, South Africa was portrayed not as a partner, but as a problem. Yet domestically, the calculation was clear. South Africa's future growth depended on infrastructure, energy security, industrialization, and access to fast-growing markets, especially in Asia. BRICS partners offered financing without the same political strings. They offered markets hungry for raw materials and manufactured goods. They offered long-term positioning in a world no longer centered solely on Washington. BRICS also offered something else: psychological confidence. For decades, economic independence felt theoretical for much of the global South. BRICS transformed it into a practical experiment. Not perfect, not risk-free, but real. This is why the shift matters. South Africa pushing back doesn't mean hostility. It means autonomy. It means redefining partnerships on more equal terms. It means resisting a system where influence flows one way. And once that happens, the old balance cannot simply be restored. Because the question is no longer whether South Africa will follow the US, it's whether the US can adapt to a world where South Africa no longer needs permission to choose. What makes South Africa's move truly disruptive isn't the speeches or headlines, it is the plumbing of global trade itself. For decades, the system was simple and unforgiving. Trade flowed through Western-controlled financial channels, payments cleared in US dollars, financing passed through institutions where the US and Europe held decisive influence. Even when African or Asian nations traded with each other, the transaction often touched New York or London first. BRICS began asking a dangerous question: what happens if we redesign the system underneath the politics? South Africa became one of the most active testing grounds. Instead of settling trade exclusively in dollars, BRICS partners started using local currencies in bilateral agreements. South Africa and China expanded yuan-rand settlements. India increased rupee-based trade mechanisms. These shifts didn't make headlines, but they rewired risk. Every trade conducted outside the dollar reduced exposure to US interest rate shocks, sanctions leverage, and external liquidity crises. It also gave governments more control over monetary stability during global turbulence. This wasn't anti-American, it was pro-survival. The second pillar of change came through financing. BRICS' new development bank offered something different from traditional lenders. Loans focused on infrastructure, energy, logistics, and industrial capacity, not austerity mandates or rapid privatization. South Africa used these channels to support power generation projects, transport corridors, and industrial upgrades that Western lenders were reluctant to fund without political concessions. Control over infrastructure is control over future trade. Ports, rail lines, energy grids, and data infrastructure determine who moves goods, who prices risk, and who captures value. By diversifying funding sources, South Africa reduced dependence on Western capital cycles. Then came commodities. South Africa sits on some of the world's most critical minerals: platinum, manganese, chromium, and rare inputs essential for energy transition technologies. BRICS trade frameworks increasingly emphasized long-term supply agreements over spot market speculation. That matters. When pricing power moves away from Western commodity exchanges, leverage shifts. Long-term contracts stabilize revenue, encourage local processing, and reduce volatility engineered by distant financial markets. China and India weren't just buyers, they were partners investing directly into refining, logistics, and industrial downstream capacity. That locks value inside South Africa instead of exporting it raw. Another quiet transformation unfolded in risk sharing. BRICS frameworks increasingly emphasized currency swap lines, reserve pooling, and coordinated liquidity support. This meant South Africa could access emergency financing without immediately turning to Western institutions that often demand rapid fiscal tightening. Financial breathing room changes political behavior. Countries with alternatives are harder to pressure, harder to isolate, and harder to coerce. And that's what raised alarms in Washington. The power of the US-led system was never just military or diplomatic, it was structural. The ability to influence behavior by controlling access to capital, payment systems, and markets was its most effective tool. BRICS didn't destroy that system, it dented it, and dents weaken leverage. From Washington's perspective, South Africa appeared to be undermining stability. From Pretoria's view, it was correcting imbalance. Because stability for whom? For decades, African economies absorbed shocks created elsewhere: financial crises, rate hikes, commodity volatility without having created them. BRICS mechanisms offered insulation. This is why the shift matters beyond South Africa. Once a middle power economy proves that diversified trade settlement, financing, and commodity pricing are possible, others follow: Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt. Even Latin American and Southeast Asian nations started testing similar arrangements. Influence erodes not through rebellion but imitation. And here's the critical truth: BRICS isn't replacing the West, it's forcing it to compete. Competition means better terms, less coercion, more negotiation. It means influence must be earned rather than assumed. That's what Washington didn't anticipate. South Africa isn't leaving the global system, it's reshaping its position within it, and reshaping power is far more disruptive than open defiance. This story isn't about South Africa choosing BRICS over the US, it's about choice itself. For the first time in decades, major economies in the global South are demonstrating that alignment is optional. That partnership doesn't require obedience, that sovereignty isn't symbolic, it's structural. BRICS became the catalyst, not because it promised perfection, but because it offered alternatives, and in geopolitics, alternatives are power. The US still matters, Western markets still matter, but monopoly influence is fading, replaced by negotiation, competition, and recalculation. The real question now isn't whether South Africa has gone too far, it's whether the old global order can adapt to a world where power is no longer centralized and where countries once expected to follow are now confident enough to lead themselves, because once a nation learns it has options, there is no going back.